And a hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode number 119 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me here on this Friday afternoon in New York. If you're checking out this episode on the YouTube channel or enjoying the content, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, turn on those notifications. Or if you're catching this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. So I am joined by yet another guest today, my favorite doctor. I'm usually not a big fan of doctors, but Dr. Anna here is my favorite doctor. So since you are unknown to the gallery out there, why don't you introduce yourself? Where are you from? How did you end up a doctor? Because she looks really young. I mean, she really looks young. But she is a doctor, and dare I say, she got really good grades as a much younger person. They don't let just anybody into a really good medical school. So, Dr. Anna, where are you from? Tell us about the moment in your life you knew you wanted to be a doctor and go from there.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Anna. I'm from Valley Stream, Long Island.
Where my mom was born. My mother lived off of the Corona Avenue exit of the Southern State Parkway. Sorry.
It's a beautiful place and very close to the city. So I think ideal location to raise a family. How did I get into doctoring? So I guess, so right now I'm currently in my residency. I'm doing my residency dual specialty, both medicine and pediatrics. So I can see your kids, your babies, you, anybody. And I'm doing my residency here on Long Island. How I got into medicine. I guess really since I was really young, I really wanted to be a veterinarian at first. And somewhere along high school, I took an AP bio class. I did very well, but not only did I do well, I actually discovered I really love anatomy, physiology, biology in and of itself. And I wanted to do something with my life where I could do something interesting, learn something interesting, but at the same time help people. And somehow medicine became it. The switch between animals and people, I don't have a great answer for. It just kind of happened and I kind of just stuck with it. And so, I went to college, I applied to medical school. I did a post-bac prior to going to medical school.
Post-bac? What does that mean?
So it's basically kind of like a get ready program for medical school. It's a year of just taking extra coursework and kind of honing in on some of the skills.
Like post-bachelor's degree, is it?
Yes. So
you see, there you go. Every now and then I throw one out there. Okay.
So after college, I did that. And then I went to medical school. I started in 2017. I graduated in 2021. And now I'm currently in my residency. I'm in my third or fourth year and just 1 year left. And then we'll see where I go from there.
Right. So like if you could, because people love this sort of stuff, if you could say 5 years from now, what would be your ideal, as you sit here today, what would be your best possible professional scenario? Location, what kind of doctoring? Are you in business for yourself, like you have your own shingle? Are you working at a hospital with that? Like, I know you must think of these things. What's your ideal setup?
Well, I guess ideally, if my plan goes into fruition, I will actually continue my training, specialize in cardiology, and ultimately I'd like to do adult congenital cardiology, which is basically taking care of adults who were born with heart diseases and are now adults with heart diseases. Right. It's a great way that I can continue my passion of cardiology while also keeping both my adults and some of my pediatric population. Where I'd like to work, ideally I'd love to stay in New York, and I would love to work with an underserved population. I very much really do like working with underserved populations and populations that need more doctors. So ideally that would be it.
Okay. And because so many of us struggled with regular school and regular college, you went a step above, way above regular school and regular college. You went to medical school. What was your lowest point academically? Did you reach a point where you, not because we all, oh, I fucked up that test, I know I failed. Did you have a moment where you were like, I'm screwed, I'm not going to get a degree here? Or was there a particular class where it just seemed to be piling on and you didn't think you were going to be able to get through?
It's a great question. It was really multiple moments in medical school, and they were all for very different reasons. I think one of my hardest topics, and I'm still really bad at, is biostatistics. It's not medicine, so it's not something
Right.
It's not primarily medicine, so it's not something I necessarily cared about. So I kind of put it on the back burner. So when it came to having to learn it for the exams or my licensing exams, it was a little bit more of a difficult subject for me. Other times would just be like, the middle of a very intense rotation where I'm rotating through a hospital floor or a clinic and I'm there for many hours and I feel like I'm overworking myself, but I still feel like I don't know anything. Those moments happened a few times around. I think surgery was my worst rotation in terms of I just struggled the most. It was a very steep learning curve and it was a very high stress. And I'm grateful I made it through it. I'm grateful I learned a lot. But I definitely had those moments.
Right. And then you hopefully have a moment where you say, I'm a fucking doctor. I'm a goddamn doctor. Now, I know that there's one story. Was it your first year of medical school, but when you
took part in the delivery of a baby? Oh, yeah.
Right, a good memory.
Yes, yes. I was in pediatrics. I was in my third year. I was in my third year of medical school. I was in pediatrics, and I was rotating in the neonatal ICU, which is like the ICU for babies. And we were sent to go to delivery. And so my attending took me, and she said, "Do you want to catch the baby?" And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but yeah. And so she put me at the head of the bed, and mom gave birth. The OB-GYN took the baby, handed it off to me. So I stood there with a little towel, scrubbed in, handed me the baby. I walked to the little incubator, put the baby down, and then we started, resuscitating the baby as per protocol. And I remember one of the doctors, I can't even, it was such a surreal moment. One of the doctors was like, "Do you want to cut the cord?" And I'm like, absolutely, I want to cut the cord, right? So I cut the cord, we clipped it, and I remember just being like, oh my God, you were a human being that was just born, and it was such an enlightening, beautiful experience for me. I thank you for reminding me of that. That was really that really was a very, very beautiful moment for me in medical school. It was the first time I ever seen a new baby fresh out of, the womb.
Right. I mean, it's something that most people will, unless you're a doctor, you're not going to see it. I remember when my sister was born, but I wasn't there. I wasn't in the room. It has to be incredibly humbling. And also, you probably had that moment where you said, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. So that is very important. We all have so many doubts about our daily lives. And did I make a mistake? Is this okay? Is that okay? But then occasionally, because life spends how much time smacking you in the face, like that. But every once in a while, you have a moment of grace. That's what that was. So, and many of you know this, the life of a doctor, especially one in residency, maybe you have a friend or, as in this case, or a relative. How did you, because it's not the same now. Now you're actually a doctor. Now you're getting paid to work your tail off, because in medical school, presumably it was, I don't want to say worse, but different. At least when you're making money, you can justify, hey, I'm getting a paycheck here. But as far as the most difficult stretches of medical school, you were putting in how many hours a day, whether it was going over modules, figuring out what my schedule is on a given day. I mean, there's no time for more than an hour of you time a day, right? It's just work, sleep, repeat, work, sleep, repeat.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about our training in general, whether it be medical student, resident, or even some of my attendings, is that despite the fact that you still have a knowledge set, a basis, a foundation, you are still essentially a lifelong learner. Medicine changes very fast, and especially now with our new technological advancements, it changes even faster. Guidelines change. We learn new things every day. So you are a lifelong learner. So it's interesting because yes, you go to work, but then you go to work and then you come home and you have to study. And how much time you put into studying really depends on where you're at your training, when you have an exam, what other obligations you have in life, whether it be a significant other, children, pets, family members, siblings. So there's a lot that really plays into your life, and you're kind of just juggling it all.
Right. See, and a lot of people who don't have somebody in their life who is a doctor, but my brain, I always default to a movie. And the movie Catch Me If You Can, that stretch of the movie where Leonardo DiCaprio's Frank Abagnale Jr. is masquerading as the attending physician on an overnight shift. And I don't even know in the movie how the hell he got there. This 16-year-old kid is somehow the attending physician at a hospital. And he basically he's bluffed his way to this point. And he remembered a couple of cute phrases from TV that he's just throwing out there, and he fucks everybody up. All he does is ask, instead of giving his own medical opinion, because he doesn't have one, he's just a kid. He doesn't know anything about medicine. He asks one of the residents, can you tell me what is going on with this patient over here? Because he doesn't know. And the guy basically explains what he thinks it is. And then he goes and looks at the other resident, and the line he got from TV, do you concur? Because he heard that on television. Do you concur? And then the fact that the guy didn't concur, DiCaprio makes it seem like he fucked up. And the guy is wandering around going, why didn't I concur? Have you ever had a do you concur, doctor moment?
I don't think I've ever used the phrase I concur, but I definitely haven't. I agree with you attending. But I definitely have had moments where I can say, as though, although I'm not as experienced as my attending, there are times I have my own clinical judgment and will say, I don't necessarily 100% agree. And both happen. And right. It's all just a learning experience.
Okay. So when you mentioned wanting to be involved in underserved communities, so just as far as your time now, as a resident, what would you say, because you're allowed to flex every now and then, but what is the best report that you got? What was the best feedback you got as far as, again, reaffirming what you were doing and why you were here and why you're a doctor?
I mean, I have actually a few moments. One, I guess the first one, when you asked the question in particular that stuck out, was I was taking care of a teenager who was in the hospital for, she was constantly throwing up. And, I would come in, I would see her, I would talk with her. And somewhere the second or third day I was working with her, Dad was in the room and he's like, Dr. Lopez, you really meant, you're in a career you really meant for. He's like, you were made for this. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. I didn't expect that. A few other times would be, I serve a large population of patients that speak Spanish only. And usually when I introduce myself in Spanish and start speaking, they get this sigh of relief, like, oh my goodness, somebody understands me. So those are always just very small but beautiful moments of my day.
And which is something that me, growing up the way that I grew up, it's not something that would have been part of the thought process. But as you get older and you meet so many different kinds of people as I have, not that I've traveled the world, but I've traveled a lot. I've met a lot of different people. And to be bilingual, and not just bilingual, to be fluent like really fluent, where you have a huge vocabulary in more than one language, it's not a gift, but it's something that is great to have. But what she says, when a patient, and I can understand this just from the layman's perspective, the patient is scared. Let's say you have somebody, even here on Long Island, it could be anywhere on Long Island, and they are sick and they are taken to the hospital, and they don't know if they're going to be understood, because there would have to be at least somebody on staff at admission, whatever it is, who speaks fluent enough Spanish, especially if the person can't really verbalize because they're hurting. And that moment that she's talking about, where you hear the language that you speak, and you immediately understand this is not somebody who took 2 years and can maybe kind of understand me. This is a person who speaks the language. And the sigh, that's real. That makes perfect sense. That just being able to be bilingual, there's a whole host of people who otherwise would be scared shitless for a lot longer than they are. And once they hear you, the family hears you, oh, okay. And then they might converse with her in Espanol. So, it's not really underrated. It's something that's very important, because presumably it made her a more attractive prospect at various schools, the fact that she is bilingual. It's very important. You need your patients to be able to understand you, regardless of what language it is. So that's good. Now, this I don't know. Okay, so for example, on my father's side of the family, both his dad and his mom, they spoke Yiddish in the home entirely. Neither of their parents, neither of my great-grandparents, none of the sets of great-grandparents on my dad's side spoke a word of English. Or if they did, they certainly didn't share it with anybody. You grew up bilingual. Were you exposed to both Spanish and English from, let's say, age 2 or 3, or did you learn Spanish and you learn English in school, or?
I primarily learned Spanish first, but it didn't take long for my English to kick off, because
right.
I went to school here. So
right, and they say this is kind of obvious, but it's again not something people might necessarily think about unless it's brought to their attention. The younger that you learn a new language, the less likely you're going to have any accent, because you're like a sponge when you're a little kid. So age 3, she could have not spoken a word of English, but by age 6, you wouldn't even know. What do you mean English isn't your first language?
I treat it like my first language. Although I learned Spanish first, I'm stronger in English. I read and write English. I am formally educated in English.
Right.
In my household, I did have members that spoke only Spanish, so the only way I could communicate with them is in Spanish. And my parents just flipped back and forth because they also were bilingual. So
it certainly keeps you sharp. It keeps you from losing. But it keeps you from losing anything if you are continually using. I learned how to read Hebrew, and theoretically, I'm supposed to know how to speak, and I can't speak Hebrew, because how often are we actually going to do that in real life? So, but my mom lived in Puerto Rico for 2 years, which is insane, but she did. Her Espanol, she said she was so sharp by the end. There were people that thought she was from Puerto Rico. She had a tan, the whole thing. Maybe she doesn't really look like she's Hispanic, but now she can converse in Spanish, but it's not like she's there. You lose it a little bit. But hearing the rat, tat, 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 it keeps you right where you need to be. You're not going to be like, no, wait a minute, what is this? You're more likely to struggle over an English word than a Spanish word. It's good. Because people, it's not that it's funny, but you're always going to be able to make yourself understood in either language. If somebody wants to say, well, technically she speaks this, but so what? She speaks them both very, very well, and that's important. And for a lot of people, it's just something that, you meet someone to say, and they're fluent in 4 languages, but there's not any kind of professional component to it. They just happen to, because some people just take to language. But in your case, it's very important to your daily life, the fact that you are bilingual.
It's also just an honor that I am able to communicate with more people than some others, and that I am able to assist twice the amount of people that I otherwise may not have the opportunity or could not help as well.
Right. Yeah, that's really great. All right, so right now you're in your it's the last of this year, and then you have one more year starting in the fall, or how does that work as far as residency?
Our years start in January. So July 1st is the day all of the new doctors start. That's when your first year residents begin. So our years begin in July. So I'm almost at the end of my third year because I'm a dual residency.
Okay,
My residency is 4 years. So I have another year left, and we'll see where we go from there.
All right. Okay, so basically, but before we close this segment, so 1 year from, so you would be quote unquote graduating or getting your medical degree. Would it be May of next year, or what are we talking? What's the?
I have my medical degree.
Yeah, duh. But I should, again, because I don't know. When I say layman, that's what I am here.
No, I will be completing my training needed to practice independently in both pediatrics and medicine.
Right, so stupid. Of course, she's already a doctor. But see, this is, again, when you go to a hospital, this isn't something that I would have ever thought about. Who here is a resident, which means they are a doctor, but they're doing their residency. Who's the attending physician? They're through it. And this is the chief of this department, the chief of that department. These are all things I never would have been aware of. And the average person, maybe some people know, but you don't identify somebody and say, oh, this is a resident. No, I don't think that she's a resident just because she looks really young. She's actually, this could be the attending physician.
You're not the first one. I will say I've had family members tell me like, oh, this is what they mean. I've seen it on Grey's Anatomy. Most people will tell me Grey's Anatomy. But I didn't understand the difference between attending or what a resident was.
Yeah.
Some people get it, some people don't. The hierarchy itself is all complex. But yes, a resident is a full MDDO, has their medical degree. They're just training for whatever specialty it is that they would like to go into. If you ever hear a fellow, less common term, but very much common in medicine, you have finished your residency, you have finished your preliminary, but now you want to subspecialize and you just want to focus on one organ system, whether it be GI or cardiology or, allergy, immunology, rheumatology. That is just specializing. So now you're training to specialize in that area. So yeah, it's just a lot of levels.
Okay. All right. So then I guess the last question or the last thing is when your residency is completed and it's over, do you foresee yourself taking a week, taking 2 weeks, or do you think you're going to know exactly where you're going from there from the professional standpoint?
I don't necessarily know if I am 100% knowing where I'm going from there. I know that I want to take a year working independently, no more training, just working. And then possibly after that, consider going back into training to subspecialize in something a little more focused where I can really master my skills in that one particular area.
All right. Well, this has definitely been informative and enlightening for me, and I think that it would be informative and enlightening to you. So we're going to take a brief break. This will be part 1, and be back with some more, some lighter material. Okay.